Sir, Mommy can't walk, little girl said. The single dad, CO, carried the woman out of the alley. Rain poured in relentless sheets over the old quarter of the city, flooding narrow streets and turning cobblestones into shimmering mirrors. Street lamps flickered weakly, their yellow light trembling in the storm. Wind curled through alleyways and around crumbling brick buildings, carrying the metallic scent of wet concrete and distant thunder. Inside a black SUV, Mark Hale kept a steady grip on the wheel. At 34, he looked every inch the polished tailored suit, composed posture, but there was something tired behind his eyes. He had been a widower for 3 years, and nights like this, full of storm and memory, always settled heavy on his chest. In the back seat, 6-year-old Liam clutched a green dinosaur plush. His hair was damp from earlier play, his eyes half closed with exhaustion. The soft thrum of rain tapped against the windows, lulling him further into sleep. Mark glanced at him in the rear-view mirror and turned the heat up. It was one small comfort he could still offer on nights when comfort felt distant. As the SUV slowed to a red light near a weathered corner store, Mark relaxed slightly. The neon sign above the door buzzed with weak red light, casting ghostly reflections on the wet pavement. Then something hit the window once, then again, rapid, desperate. Mark sat up straighter, squinting through the downpour. A small figure stood just beyond the glass. He rolled the window down halfway, letting in a blast of freezing rain. A little girl stood there, soaked to the bone. Her thin dress clung to her, her hair dripping into her eyes. She looked up at him, shivering, eyes red and wide. "Sweetheart," Mark said, startled. "Are you okay? Where's your family?" She shook her head quickly, lips trembling. "Sir, Mommy can't walk. Mommy fell. Please help." The words hit him like a shock. Mark opened the door and stepped out into the storm, crouching low. "Come here. I'll take you inside." But the girl grabbed his wrist with surprising force. "No," she cried. "This way, Mommy is here." Without waiting, she turned and ran into the alley behind the store. Mark hesitated only long enough to glance at Liam, who had pressed his face to the window, eyes wide. Mark raised a calming hand. "Stay!" Then followed the girl into the dark. Rain slammed against the pavement as they moved deeper into the alley. The only light came from a flickering bulb above a rusted door, barely piercing the shadows. "There," the girl whispered, pointing. A lightning bolt cracked the sky. In that momentary flash, Mark saw her. A woman lay slumped against the brick wall, rain pouring over her. Her long blonde hair was tangled and drenched. Her skin looked pale, lips parted slightly. One arm was limp at her side, the other resting weakly across her lap as though she tried to keep herself upright. "Mommy." The girl rushed to her, clutching her hand. Mark knelt beside the woman. He pushed the wet hair back from her face and froze. He knew her, Ariana Blake. Just hours ago, she had stood across from him at a press conference. She had looked him in the eye in front of an entire room of reporters and publicly challenged his company's labor policies. She had been bold, articulate, unshakable. Now she was unconscious in a freezing alley, soaked and helpless. Mark stared at her, stunned. The defiance she had worn so fiercely that morning was gone, washed away by storm and exhaustion. Without a word, he slipped his arms beneath her and lifted her gently off the ground. The little girl held on to her mother's hand as they walked back into the rain, and everything Mark thought he knew about Ariana shattered into pieces. Mark gently laid Ariana across the back seat of his SUV, shielding her from the rain as best he could. Her skin was cold to the touch, her breathing faint, even under layers of wet clothing. She felt startlingly light in his arms, fragile in a way that stirred something deep in his chest. He turned the heat up and grabbed the emergency blanket he kept in the back compartment, wrapping it carefully around her. Her head lolled slightly to the side, lips pale, eyelashes clumped with rain. In the front seat, the little girl, Ella, climbed up on her knees, watching her mother anxiously. "She's going to be okay," Mark said, trying to sound certain, though his own heart was still racing. But Ella's lower lip trembled. Her tiny fists clenched. "Mommy didn't eat all day," she whispered. "She works too much." Mark's hands froze. He turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" Ella's voice cracked as she started to cry. She works all day in the office and then at the restaurant. Mommy says we have to pay rent soon. She was so tired today. She said we could walk home faster through the alley. Mark slowly sank into driver's seat, staring through the windshield as the storm pelted the glass. This was not an accident. This was not random. This was exhaustion. Real bone-deep exhaustion. And suddenly the memory of her bold, passionate voice from the press conference that morning rang in his ears. Your company delays payments to temporary workers, mothers, single parents who can't afford to wait even a day. He had been irritated at the time, defensive. He had brushed it off as someone looking to score a headline. Now he realized she had not been speaking theoretically. She had been speaking from experience. Ella curled up beside her mother, resting her tiny hand over Ariana's. Mark's expression shifted from surprise to something deeper, respect, compassion. Just then, headlights turned into the street. The sound of an approaching siren cut through the storm. Mark stepped out and waved down the ambulance. 2 EMTs rushed over with a stretcher. Mark helped them carefully lift Ariana out. Ella held tightly onto her mother's hand until one of the paramedics gently coaxed her into the back seat with Mark. As the SUV pulled away behind the ambulance, Mark's mind raced. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the hospital. In the ER, he stayed close with Ella while the doctor stabilized Ariana. When she was finally wheeled into a quieter room, pale but conscious, Mark entered softly with Ella in his arms. Ariana blinked, her vision still foggy, and then her eyes focused on him. "You," she croaked. "The CO?" Mark nodded, gently lowering Ella beside her mother. Ariana's brows furrowed in disbelief. Her voice was barely audible. "This doesn't make sense." Ella clung to her side, wrapping her arms tightly around her. A nurse entered with paperwork, motioning toward Mark. "Sir, we'll need a primary payment for the emergency visit." Ariana stirred. "Wait, I can pay. I have insurance. Just give me a minute." Mark didn't hesitate. He handed over his card. "No," Ariana said weakly, reaching out. "Please, I can take care of it." He turned back to her, voice low but steady. "Tonight," he said, "helping you is more important than anything else." The room fell silent. The nurse paused, visibly moved before quietly stepping away with the payment. Ariana stared at him, unsure what to say. Her face was still pale, her hair messy and damp, but her eyes shone with something that wasn't defeat. "You don't even know me," she whispered. Mark looked at her for a long moment, then down at Ella, who was drifting off, still clutching her mother's arm. "I know you're someone who works too hard and still worries more about your child than yourself," he said. "That's enough for now." And in that moment, the storm outside finally began to ease. A soft beep echoed in the hospital room. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the rain tapped gently now against the window. Ariana stirred, her head heavy on the pillow. Her eyelids fluttered open slowly, blinking against the dim light. Her body ached, but her first instinct was to sit up. "Mommy," Ella cried, scrambling from the chair beside the bed and throwing her little arms around her. Ariana winced, but pulled her daughter close. "I'm okay, baby. I'm okay." She brushed back Ella's curls with shaky fingers, damp strands clinging to her skin. Her vision cleared enough to see the door and him. Mark stood quietly in the corner, dressed in a gray sweater and black coat with Liam at his side. His expression was unreadable, respectful, composed, but distant enough to make her chest tighten. The alley came rushing back, the cold, his arms lifting her, and before that the press conference. She had called him out publicly, criticized the CEO of Hale Industries in front of cameras, unaware they'd meet again like this. She shifted, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed. "Thank you," she said. Mark nodded. "You're welcome." Silence stretched between them. Liam, sensing tension, tugged his father's sleeve. Mark glanced down, then reached into his coat pocket. Liam wanted to give Ella something, he said, pulling out a small red toy car. He walked forward, handing it to Ella. "For when you feel better," he said gently. Ella's eyes lit up. "Thank you." She turned to her mom. "Look, it even has lightning bolts." Ariana looked at the car, then at Mark. "That's very kind of you and him." "It was his idea," Mark replied. then gestured toward the door. We'll give you some space. Before he could leave, a nurse entered holding a folded blanket. Sorry to interrupt, but your daughter's still damp and shivering. The nurse said, Do you have dry clothes for her? Ariana hesitated, embarrassed. I didn't bring any extra. Without missing a beat, Mark shrugged off his tailored coat. He walked to the bed, knelt, and wrapped it gently around Ella's small frame. The coat swallowed her, but she leaned into the warmth with a contented sigh. Better? He asked. Ella nodded. It smells like a fireplace. Mark chuckled. That's a cologne. Close enough. Ariana stared. The same man who sat stone-faced in a boardroom now knelt beside her daughter with quiet tenderness. His gestures weren't grand. They were thoughtful. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice low. He stood. Because someone needed help. You already paid for the ER. I'll pay you back. Mark looked at her calm but firm. Saving someone isn't a transaction. Ariana. Her breath caught. Before she could reply, the nurse returned holding a tablet. Mr. Hale, sorry, but the media system caught a clip from earlier. We usually archive footage, but someone noticed. She turned the screen toward him. A video played silently. Mark kneeling, draping his expensive coat over Ella. Ariana pale and dazed, Ella clutching the coat with wide, grateful eyes. The nurse smiled. Someone posted it to our internal page. It's already circulating online. Mark frowned. Please keep it private. But Ariana could already imagine headlines. How people who ignored her struggle would now pay attention because a wealthy man was involved. Mark seemed to sense it, too. If this causes trouble, I'll handle it. She looked at him, not as a CEO, not as the man she challenged, but just as a man, a father, a human being who didn't walk away when it mattered. For the first time, Ariana wondered who in the room had been carrying the heavier weight, her or him. 1 week after Ariana was discharged from the hospital, Mark found himself standing in the narrow aisle of a discount store near a worn-down apartment complex. Liam tugged at his hand, eager to find a toy, but Mark's eyes drifted to the far end of the baby products section. Ariana stood in front of a shelf of infant formula. Her office shirt was wrinkled, her blonde hair loosely tied back as if she'd rushed out the door. In one hand, she held a small bottle of milk. With the other, she fumbled through a weathered wallet, counting coins with quiet urgency. We can only buy one, Ella, she murmured softly. Ella stood beside her, hugging a faded doll that matched her expression, tired but silent. She didn't complain. She just nodded. Mark stood a few feet away, holding Liam's hand, his chest tightened. Ariana hadn't seen him yet. Her full attention was on the coins in her palm, trying to make them stretch when she finally looked up and saw him. Her eyes widened. She closed the wallet quickly, fingers clutching the coins as if they were something shameful. Straightening, she gave a nervous smile. I was just taking a while to decide, she said, attempting to sound casual. Mark didn't reply. He didn't want to embarrass her. He simply gave a small nod and smiled at Ella. For the first time, he saw Ariana's reality, not through hospital walls, but through the quiet struggles of her everyday life. A few days later, Mark took Liam to a small diner near his school. The place was simple, cracked vinyl booths and the scent of grilled cheese hanging in the air. As they walked in, Liam pointed excitedly. Daddy, look, it's Ella's mommy. Near the kitchen doors, Ariana balanced a tray of drinks. She wore a black t-shirt with the diner's logo and a faded apron. Her hair was in a messy ponytail. She froze briefly upon seeing Mark, but quickly recovered with a professional smile. Hi, Mark, she said cautiously. She took their order, trying to stay composed, but her hands trembled slightly as she wrote down their drinks. In the corner of the diner, Ella sat alone at a table coloring with broken crayons on a napkin. Liam pulled out one of his favorite smiley face stickers and walked over to Ella. For you, he said brightly. Ella beamed. Thank you. Mark watched quietly. His gaze lingered on Ariana, who moved quickly between tables while glancing back at Ella every few minutes. He saw the exhaustion, the multitasking, the strength, and it stirred something inside him he couldn't name. Later that week, on a mild afternoon, Mark brought Liam to the neighborhood park. The playground was worn, the benches chipped, but laughter still echoed through the space. Ella saw Liam first. She ran to him, arms wide. Liam. Ariana followed behind, breathless, but smiling. The children sat under a tree. Liam broke a cookie in half and handed a piece to Ella. In return, she unclipped a sparkly star-shaped hairpin from her golden curls and placed it gently in Liam's palm. Nearby, Mark and Ariana stood in silence, watching the innocent exchange. It felt oddly natural, peaceful. Then, on another afternoon, chaos struck. Ariana had bought Ella a cookie from a street vendor. Ella rushed to show Liam, proudly holding it up. But seconds later, her face changed. She clutched her throat and began to choke. Panic flashed across Ariana's face. Ella, baby, breathe, please. Other parents froze. No one moved. Mark dropped his coffee and ran. Ariana, let me. He knelt behind Ella, carefully, placing his hands and performed the Heimlich. One compression, then another. A piece of cookie flew from her mouth. Ella gasped, coughed, and then wailed, flinging herself into Ariana's arms. Ariana collapsed to the ground with her daughter, trembling. Tears streamed down her cheeks uncontrollably. She looked up. Her eyes found Mark's, and something in them shifted. No fear, no guarded expression, no resentment from the past, only raw gratitude. She saw him now, not as the man she once confronted in a boardroom, not just as a CO, but as a man who had just saved her little girl. Mark stared back, frozen by the emotion in her gaze. In that moment, something settled inside him. For the first time in years, he felt what he hadn't dared to hope for. Maybe, just maybe, he mattered again. The subtle bond forming between Mark, Ariana, and their two children did not go unnoticed for long. In the small community where Ariana lived and worked, whispers began to circulate about the single mother scene at the playground with the CEO, about how his son and her daughter were becoming inseparable, about the way he looked at her like she was someone who mattered. Some voices were kind, but others not so much. It was only a matter of time before the gossip reached the wrong ears. One afternoon, as Mark stepped out of a meeting and walked across the parking lot toward his car, he heard a familiar voice behind him. Well, Mark Hale playing knight in shining armor now. He turned to see Brent Talbot, a former executive from a partner firm. Someone Mark barely tolerated during business dealings, and someone Ariana once worked under. Brent had a smirk on his face, and the smug arrogance of a man who had never been told no in his life. Mark remained still. What do you want? Brent chuckled, crossing his arms. Just thought you should know what people are saying. That little blonde, Ariana Blake, she's using you. First she flamed out of the corporate world, and now what? She clings to the Golden Boy CEO, hoping to secure a better future with pity and a cute kid. Mark's jaw tightened. Brent went on, his voice dripping with contempt. You think she's different, but they're all the same. Give a few months. She'll be asking for a job, a condo, maybe even a ring. Before he could finish, Mark's fist connected with Brent's jaw. The crack of the punch echoed across the lot. Brent stumbled back, stunned, one hand at his face, the other pointing accusingly. You're insane. Mark didn't respond. His chest heaved, but his voice was calm. Say one more word about her, and I won't stop at one. Brent spat on the ground, wiping blood from his mouth, then turned and stormed off. What neither man realized was that Ariana had seen the entire thing. She had been on her way to meet a friend across the street and caught sight of Mark just before the confrontation happened. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, her heart pounding, her breath shallow. He had defended her. But what lingered more deeply than the violence was the guilt, the heaviness. That night, she waited for Liam and Ella to fall asleep in the corner of her modest apartment before texting Mark to meet her downstairs. He arrived minutes later, the look on his face unreadable. I saw what happened, she said quietly. Mark looked away. He crossed a line. Ariana stepped forward. Her eyes were wide, vulnerable. I did not ask you to fight for me. I know. She hesitated, then added, Mark, I do not want to be a burden to you. His head snapped toward her. Ariana, he said, his voice firm but gentle. Needing help does not make you a burden. She opened her mouth to argue, but he stepped closer. You are raising a child on your own. You are working 2 jobs. You are doing everything you can to survive. And you still smile. You still try every single day. That does not make you weak. That makes you strong. Stronger than most people I know. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. I've spent years trying not to need anyone. She whispered. I spent years thinking no one would ever need me again. He replied softly. They stood there under the street lamp in a silence that was not awkward, but honest, raw with the weight of the past and the ache of everything unspoken. And for the first time, Ariana did not feel like she was falling. She felt held. The change was quiet, but sharp, like a door that closes softly but locks firmly. It began after a Sunday brunch at Mark's family estate. His mother, Evelyn Hale, had invited him and Liam for their usual catch-up. But when Mark brought up Ariana and Ella, his voice carrying a warmth Evelyn hadn't seen in years. Her expression tightened. You're letting yourself get too involved, she said, her tone carefully neutral, but her eyes hard. Mark, taken aback, sipped his coffee. What does that mean? You know exactly what it means, Evelyn replied, setting down her porcelain cup with a faint clink. She's a single mother. She's struggling. And Mark, you're vulnerable to that, still healing. He leaned back slightly, jaw tightening. This has nothing to do with healing. It's about who she is, or who she says she is. Evelyn cut in gently but firmly. You don't know her past. You know her story, but you don't know her. She's not trying to use me, Mom. No, she asked, folding her hands. Because from the outside, it looks exactly like that. A CEO, a young widow, and a woman with nothing to lose. It may not be calculated, Mark, but it is convenient. Mark stood up without a word. He had faced investors in boardrooms, but the ache of disbelief in his own mother's voice stung more than any corporate betrayal. Within a few days, Ariana sensed something was wrong. At first, it was just a change in tone from others, whispers at Ella's daycare, strangers staring too long, a neighbor mentioning Mark's name with a tone that made her heart drop. But then one evening, Evelyn herself appeared at the cafe where Ariana worked her evening shift. She came alone, dressed in elegance that didn't belong in a neighborhood like this. Ariana blinked in surprise when she saw her, towel in hand. Mrs. Hale, I thought it was time we talked. Ariana led her to an empty table. The conversation was short. Evelyn did not insult her. She did not raise her voice. What she did was far worse. Speak with polite precision that left no room for argument. You're a strong woman, she said, and I admire that. But my son has been through enough. He lost someone he loved. He has a child who is just now smiling again. And I cannot allow his world to be shaken by a relationship that quite frankly has too many unknowns. Ariana's throat tightened. I'm not trying to hurt him, she said quietly. Evelyn gave a small, sad smile. Then do what is best. Step back. Let him move on peacefully. That night, Ariana sat awake next to Ella watching her sleep. She thought of the way Liam laughed when he saw Ella at the park. She thought of Mark's hand brushing hers on a cold morning. She thought of the way he looked at her like she was someone who deserved to be chosen, not pied. And then she did the hardest thing. She stepped away. She stopped replying to Mark's texts. She changed her route home. She worked longer shifts. And when Liam came to daycare, Ella's teacher would gently redirect him before he could run to her. Liam cried the first day. He realized Ella was not there. He asked Mark, "Did I do something wrong?" And Mark didn't know how to answer. Mark searched for Ariana, but she was never where she used to be. Her apartment door stayed closed. Her phone went unanswered. And even though he was the CEO of a major company, a man used to solving any problem thrown his way, Mark Hale couldn't fix this. Not with logic, not with power. Because sometimes love does not break with noise, but with silence. It happened on a cold morning, the kind where the sky hung low and pale, and the air carried the scent of the season's first snow. Evelyn Hale had stopped by a small corner bakery known for its winter apple tarts, something she always bought when the weather turned. As she stepped out with a warm box in hand, she nearly bumped into a small child bundled in a pink coat with faux fur trim, dragging a stuffed bunny across the wet sidewalk. "Careful, sweetheart," Evelyn said, steadying her. The child looked up with wide, familiar eyes. "Hi," she chirped. "I know you. You're Mr. Mark's mommy." Evelyn froze, her breath catching. "And you must be Ella," she said softly, kneeling. "Where's your mom?" "She's inside," Ella replied, pointing at a pharmacy next door. "She's getting medicine. Mommy has 2 jobs, so we can have a warm house. Sometimes she gets really tired." Evelyn blinked. 2 jobs? Ella nodded. "She works in the morning and at night. She never sleeps much, but she says it's okay because I'm her favorite thing in the world." Those words landed heavier than anything Evelyn had expected. She glanced toward the glass window of the pharmacy, where Ariana stood at the counter. Even through the glare, she looked utterly drained. Shoulders sagged beneath a thin coat, her blonde hair pinned back hastily. Then Ella added, "Mommy says Mr. Mark is a good man, but she doesn't want to bother him because he's already helping lots of people." Evelyn's heart twisted. She looked at Ella, then at Ariana again, this time truly seeing her. Ariana hadn't asked for help, hadn't expected pity. She'd walked away not to manipulate, but to protect her child and Mark. That afternoon, Evelyn went to Ariana's apartment. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and cleaning supplies. When the door opened, Ariana blinked in shock. "Mrs. Hale," she asked quietly. "I came to apologize," Evelyn said. "I misjudged you." Ariana didn't move, her hand still on the knob. "I thought I was protecting my son," Evelyn continued. "But all I did was protect my own idea of what his life should be. And in the process, I push away someone who's been doing everything to survive with dignity." Ariana's eyes shimmered wordlessly. She stepped aside and let her in. Later that week, snow blanketed the city in gentle white. In Central Park, benches were dusted in frost and trees shimmered with ice. Ariana and Ella walked slowly along a quiet path. Ella twirled in her boots, giggling as she caught snowflakes on her tongue, while Ariana sat alone on a cold bench, arms wrapped around herself, not from the cold, but from absence. Then a voice called her name. "Ariana." She turned, heart leaping. Mark stood a few steps away, snow in his hair, wrapped in a long coat. Liam clutched his hand, brightening at the sight of Ella. Ariana stood, breath caught. "How did you?" "My mother told me everything," Mark said, "and I've been looking every day." Ella ran to Liam, their laughter echoing as they began shaping snow into a tiny fort. Ariana faced Mark, conflicted. "I thought this was what you wanted for me to go." "I never wanted you gone," he replied. "I just didn't know how much I needed you until you were." He stepped forward, his voice low. "You've been carrying the weight of the world by yourself. Let me carry some of it, please." Ariana tried to answer, but tears fell silently. She didn't pull away when he reached for her hands. Behind them, the children played in the snow, and in that quiet, falling white, Ariana finally let herself lean into him. For the first time, she let herself rest, not because she was weak, but because she was finally seen. And maybe it was okay to let someone stay. Under the soft glow of winter lights and the gentle hush of falling snow, the community hall buzzed with quiet excitement. Banners reading "Empower Her," supporting single mothers, stretched across the stage where rows of chairs were quickly filling with attendees, journalists, employees, local families. At the center of it all stood Mark Hale, dressed in a charcoal suit that somehow managed to look both sharp and effortless. Beside him, Liam fidgeted slightly in his tiny navy blazer, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on a familiar figure entering the hall. Ariana Blake stepped in, her golden hair loosely curled, wearing a simple but elegant navy dress. She held Ella's hand tightly, but the little girl quickly broke free to run toward Liam, squealing with delight. They met halfway down the aisle, laughing as they hugged like long-lost siblings. Ariana paused, her eyes sweeping over the room, heart fluttering as she met Mark's gaze. He smiled, not the smile of a CEO addressing a crowd, but of a man seeing someone who changed his life. She walked to the front slowly, every step measured, not because she was hesitant, but because she could not believe she was being honored here at an event inspired by her struggle. When they reached the stage, Mark took Ariana's hand gently and helped her up the stairs. The applause that followed was warm, genuine. Ariana looked out at the crowd, her chest tight with emotion. She had spent years hiding in the shadows of survival. Now she stood in the spotlight, not for being perfect, but for enduring. Mark stepped forward to speak, adjusting the microphone. His voice was steady, but full of feeling. Tonight, we launch Empower Her, a program aimed at providing support, training, and opportunities for single mothers across the city. And it all began because of one woman. A woman who never gave up, who carried more than her share, who showed me what quiet strength looks like. He turned slightly, his eyes on Ariana. Some heroes are mothers who fight alone every day, he said, who get up without applause, who hold their families together with love and tired hands. Ariana Blake, thank you for reminding me what real courage looks like. The room erupted in applause, but Ariana was barely aware of it. Her eyes shimmered with tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming release of finally being seen, being valued, not as a burden, but as an example. Mark knelt down, turning to Ella, who stood at the edge of the stage in a little white coat, holding Liam's hand. He looked into her eyes and asked softly, "Can I take care of both of you? Not just today, but every day." Ella's face lit up as if all the stars had gathered behind her smile. "Yes," she shouted. "Daddy Mark." The crowd laughed and applauded again, but the moment belonged only to them. Ariana knelt beside them, her hand covering her mouth. Then, without a word, she leaned in and kissed Mark on the cheek, tears silently slipping down her face. Her nod was small, but filled with every unspoken yes she had ever carried. Mark scooped Ella into his arms, while Ariana wrapped her arms around Liam. The four of them stood together as the first snow of the night began to fall outside the glass windows. No longer two broken families, just one whole, imperfect, beautiful one. And in that quiet snowfall, with laughter echoing and hearts finally at rest, a new beginning was written. A beginning no longer born from rescue or desperation, but from choice, from love.